he did it once, and I said, well, did she find out? He said yes, and then he did it again, and then I think and then he said to me, I just didn't care anymore. So
he didn't care anymore, but he didn't get a divorce. He cheated.
no, he wasn't divorced even when I met him.
Oh, okay. So that's another issue.
He was still married. He was still giving her money.
Hey, everybody. I am Sandy Weiner. Welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you on your journey to love, I have written 3 books. My latest book was published in late 2024, and it's called Love at Last. And it's true stories of falling in love later in life. I interviewed many couples and chose 18 of them for the book to show you that love comes in all shapes and sizes. It comes to people at many stages of life, not just when we're young, not just to the perfectly fit and brilliant and wealthy and gorgeous. And it really does come to so many people at so many different times. And you can find all my books on Amazon for Kindle or paperback. Before I bring on my guest, I want to invite you to join my Facebook group. It's called Your Last First Date, and it's just a very supportive group for any woman over 40 who is interested in a positive place of support. We have very strict guidelines that I created because I want it to be a safe space. It's pretty rare out there to have somebody actually set guidelines and enforce guidelines. And that's the mission I have in general, is to help people with boundaries and communication skills. And so we reflect that in the Facebook group. So it's called Your Last First Date. And now for my guest. This is actually a special podcast episode. Every once in a while, I do a live coaching episode with a one-time client who I've never met before. This woman's name is Karen, and she is interested in dating again after a breakup with somebody that was really special to her. So let me first read what Karen sent in, and then we will get right to coaching. Karen said, I'm 59 years old, and I was in a 4-year passionate relationship that recently ended when he decided he wanted to work away 6 months of the year because that didn't work for me. We got back together briefly earlier this year, but the feelings were gone. Also, he had slept with an ex and lied about it, so the trust was broken. 6 months have passed, and I feel ready to date again. I'm on a few apps and finding there are very few men I find attractive in my age range. I feel ready to take the next big step, but I'm not sure where to find my last first date. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Thank you for having me. But I live in the south of France. I relocated about 8 years ago.
That changes the kind of men that you're looking at on the apps.
It makes it quite hard, yes.
You mentioned, first of all, having trust betrayed is a big deal. And having had such strong feelings for somebody is also a big deal. And so I want to commend you, first of all, for your boundaries, that you did not just take him back without any agreements, and also that you let him go and it wasn't going to work for you because he wasn't going to be around for 6 months out of the year. So let's back up for a minute and talk about why you took him back.
So we split last August, so just over a year ago. As you said, before we met right at the beginning of COVID, and he was working as an engineer on a boat. He'd previously been on oil rigs. He said he didn't want to do that anymore. He wanted to stay in France, build a life together. We got a dog. And then about the beginning of last year, he suddenly went, well, actually, I want to go back on oil rigs. I want to do kind of a month on, a month off, hence 6 months at home, 6 months away. He has a house in Bali. He's Australian. So he was like, and then I'd like to spend 3 months in Bali and then a month with my children. And I was kind of like, actually, that's more than a year. You're going to a year. So we toed and froed. He then went off to Singapore. Well, yeah, it was Singapore for 2 months, which was July and August. I discussed it with him. And then while he was away, I said, look, I just don't think this works. He came back in the October. I was a bit like, oh, maybe this is the right thing to do. Then I discovered he slept with someone else. And then he had lied about it, and made a video of it and uploaded it on a swinging website. So it was quite hard to deal with. So I said no. And then he came back here in February. And what made me take him back was my friends. So we had a couple of sets of mutual friends, and it was like, oh, he's so upset, he so loves you. And I was kind of, I don't know, I was on the happy ever after crack cocaine, and went, oh well, maybe he really does love me. And then he went away on another rig. And then when he came back, we went on holiday to Bali, and I just thought and then he told me something which he'd also lied about one of my friends, and I just thought, it's gone. I just don't love you enough for this. And I think also for him, the life I want and the life he wants are just very, very different. So it was probably a kind thing to do from my point of view as well. But for me, yeah, it's taken more of a toll than I expected.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned passion, so there's a lot of chemistry.
There was a lot of chemistry. So, as I say, we met at the beginning of COVID. My mum was in the UK. She died of COVID 5 days after we met.
Oh, wow.
And because of the restrictions, I couldn't see her. I didn't go to the funeral. So we met, I think, in a very heightened emotional state. And so there was this grand romance. So then he did find some work on a boat, and the boat was going to leave. And he was like, oh, I'm not going to leave. I'll stay with you. And it was all like, hearts and flowers. And this is so lovely that someone loves me so much that they don't want to leave. And then, yeah, then he just reverted to what he really wanted to do, I think.
It sounds like there were some red flags from the beginning. That
There were a lot of red flags. There were a lot of red flags, actually, when you look back on it.
Let's get to the red flags, and then we'll talk about why you ignored red flags. So what were some of the red flags?
He'd been married twice before. He'd had affairs both times. He got to a point in his first marriage where his first wife had two children, and then they had a child together. It was quite a long time, and I think their son was about 14, but he was like, I want to go sailing. Will you come sailing with me? She said, no, I want to be at home, let the child have a stable home. So he left. And his son kind of went off the rails, got expelled from a couple of schools, and really struggled with it. He lied about having herpes. So I asked him if he had any sexually transmitted disease. He said no. He did tell me later, but that's another kind of red flag. And then I suppose, yeah, the fact that he was very unfaithful to his second wife, serially unfaithful. So when we got together, I was kind of so in love by that point that my head was like, well, it's fine, he'll be fine, we can sort this out. And for to be fair to him, for 3.5 years, he says, and I do believe him, he was faithful and well behaved, but the leopard spots came out in the end.
The best time to see the red flags is before you catch feelings and before you sleep with somebody, exactly. Right? And afterwards, your brain gets really fuzzy and kind of stupid, and you can't make good choices anymore. And so, yeah. And you met him at a really highly emotional time where you needed emotional support. You really wanted attention and love, and you couldn't see your mom. And it's really terrible that she died during COVID, and you couldn't even see her or go to the funeral. I mean, that's a lot of trauma that it sounds like may not have gotten processed fully at the time.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
I want to talk a little bit about childhood and which of your parents this reminded you of.
Oh, My natural mother. That's an interesting question. No one's ever asked me that before. I'm adopted. So I was adopted at 6 weeks by into a very stable home. And I met my natural mother when I was 21. And we're still reasonably good friends. So I speak to her on a fairly regular basis.
Well, tell me a little bit more about her.
Well, she'll be 18 in February. So she's fit and well and healthy, touch wood. She had me when she was 20 or 21. She was married to someone who wasn't my father. He didn't want to have the child. So he was also, I think he was actually in prison at the time. So she decided this was not a good place for a child to grow up. So she had me adopted. She subsequently had 2 children. And then about 9 years ago, she shared that there was another sibling that she'd also had adopted before me, who would have been around when she was about 18.
Who she gave up for adoption.
She gave up for adoption, yeah.
So what about her reminded you of him? Like where are the similarities?
The ability to leave. Not just the ability to leave me in his case, but also to leave our dog, because we got our dog together, and then to just leave and never be interested in his welfare, I think is probably the thing. I don't know whether I channel all of my emotion into that one thing, but that's the thing that always gets to me. The other thing I would say is the similarity is the putting her own needs above others.
So this man, he was willing to do that. I mean, he prioritized travel, adventure, being out there, having a career that didn't involve a steady relationship. And he did that with his wife, who didn't want to go on the sailing adventure, right? Mm-hmm. He'd rather give her up than give up adventure, give up, the experience of swinging, of having affairs, of, getting bored with one person, whatever reason he used to not value the person in front of him and not work on it. But the fact that he lied about herpes that's such a betrayal. That affects you. That's not just about him. So knowing all these things, you still chose him for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. Have you ever abandoned your own needs for other people?
I suppose to some extent. I mean, I only moved to France when my daughter left for university. So I would have liked to come sooner, but my then ex-husband, her father was in Nottingham, so I didn't want to leave the family or take them away. So I always said that I wouldn't move until the children were old enough. To be honest, my 2 ex-husbands have both said that I was very selfish. So I don't know.
Interesting. Do you agree with them?
My instinctive answer was no. I was going to say no, but I don't know. Maybe I was, yes, maybe I was selfish in when I left the first marriage to do other things. The second, no.
Tell me why the marriages ended.
I would say ignoring the red flags from the beginning. The first marriage ended because I wasn't very keen on having, we had the house, we had the 2 children, we had the friends, we had the barbecues, we had the kids' parties, I had a good job, but I was bored. I wanted to do other things, wanted to live a different life. So maybe in some ways I do empathize with my last partner. And then the second marriage, my husband was sociopathic. So that was a very different thing. And at the time when I first met him, my friends were all like, "Oh, we're really worried about you." And he's, we want to get a private detective. And I was kind of like, what? I really, no, didn't see it at all.
This red flag blindness is common.
I think red flag blindness is quite, yeah, it's quite that. But what it's done now is it makes me really, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm not even sure I want to get involved with any other man because of this factor.
Well, so what you can do is learn to recognize red flags early on and speak to them before you get sexually involved, because that's when your brain will be the most sharp. And if you're always looking for chemistry versus compatibility, or valuing chemistry more than compatibility, then you're going to consistently find the red flags are going to show up and you're going to ignore them. And and say, well, this is fun, this is an adventure, but then it takes its toll because here you are again after a big breakup that took its toll on you.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that you find very few men attractive. So that's where the chemistry piece comes in, where you're looking for that instant attraction. You're looking for attraction in a photo or a series of photos versus the attraction of somebody who actually has the qualities that would make for a good partner, because they become more attractive. Yeah. So let's talk about some of your must-haves and your deal breakers. Do you know what they are?
Fitness is certainly one. So somebody who looks after themselves, who eats well, who's not a big alcohol consumer, who doesn't smoke, ideally not allergic to dogs, and intelligent. I think I am very much a sapiophile. I look for intelligence in people and a joy in the world. I'm not looking for somebody who's necessarily wealthy. It would be nice. I'm not wealthy, but it would be nice if someone was a similar income so we can do the same kind of things without worrying too much about money. But money is not a big driver for me.
Physically fit, and you said that means somebody who's healthy, both in taking care of their body, eats healthy, all those kinds of things. You know, not perfect, but somebody who takes care of themselves.
Yeah, no, I'm not looking for Adonis. I'm just looking for someone who's, because, as we get older, we need to look after ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So that includes not being an alcoholic or a smoker, somebody who's intelligent. So what is intelligence to you? What kind of intelligent?
I think it's about curiosity, an interest in the world. It's probably not intense focus on one particular subject. The ability to discuss things, speed of thought. My brain goes quite quickly, so somebody who can cope with that.
It's important to separate the nice to have from the must haves, right? The nice to have would be has enough money to travel with you, things like that, but doesn't have to have a high income. Nice to have is somebody who can think really quickly, but that sounds like it is really important to you because you want to have that kind of intellectual connection with him.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something like sees the world in a positive way, joy, has experience like gratitude. Tell me more about what that means.
I have ups and downs like all people and down days and feel a bit sometimes, but I think generally I'm incredibly grateful for what I have in terms of my health, friends that I have, my dog, my children. I mean, my work. I'm very happy. I have a good balance. I've been very lucky. I've also worked hard to carve that space. I think to have somebody who's not taken that responsibility, I struggle with. Although in terms of the kind of the yin and yang, because I'm probably more naturally optimistic, a little bit risk taker, having someone who's a bit less risk taking is probably a nice balance.
For sure. What are some of the deal breakers, the red flags that you're going to look out for this time around? A liar, I'm assuming.
Lying is the biggest problem I have.
Yeah.
And not taking care of themselves. And when I say I don't find people attractive, I think it's if somebody is obese, for me, that's, unless obviously it's a medical problem that they have, for me, that's not taking care of themselves.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/lastfirstdate to learn more and claim this offer. Let's focus on the lying. I want to get clear about what will happen if you meet somebody and you find out that what they told you is a lie. What would you do this time?
If it was early in the relationship, I would probably walk away. I think if I've started to invest in it, I would probably rewrite a narrative for them and, say, well, it's only a little lie, or he felt awkward about it, or he told me, fairly quickly, or I don't know. Like I said, write a narrative of excuse for him.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to stop doing that. That's going to be part of your homework. It's really important not to excuse the inexcusable, right? There's a boundary that you have that says, I don't want to be with a liar. And then you betray yourself when the person lies and you make an excuse for them and you give them another chance and you think it's not going to repeat. And then you've seen repeated lies, repeated actions or inactions that don't work for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so there has to be a pattern interrupt for you to not get hurt again by the people who could be liars. Because, yeah, there are liars out there and there are people who are truth tellers. And there are people who might be really nice people that you might not be attracted to at first because they seem boring, but they're actually really interesting. And so having a really clear list of what is it that I absolutely need to have in a partner, and what does not work for me, what is an absolute deal breaker where I will walk away, right? I will walk away from anybody who tells me a lie. And so there's different kinds of lies, right? There's a lie that's a white lie that I told you because I was afraid to tell you the truth. And those kinds of relationships can work if the person admits that they lied and is doing something about it. It's when the apology is insincere and they have, this is a pattern and they've lied before. Even when you ask somebody about past relationships. So the last guy you dated who cheated on his wife, I would ask more questions.
We talked a lot about it.
And what was his responsibility? Because he did this.
He said that he'd gone into the marriage too soon. Or too quickly, and on his wedding day, even then, he realized it wasn't going to work, and so therefore he did it once. And I said, well, did she find out? He said yes, and then he did it again, and then I think he just and then he said to me, I just didn't care anymore. So
he didn't care anymore, but he didn't get a divorce. He cheated.
No, he wasn't divorced even when I met him.
Oh, okay. So that's another issue.
He was still married. He was still giving her money. And yeah, I found part of me thought that was quite sweet, actually. And part of me was very suspicious about the whole thing.
Yeah. So the part of you that is seeing the good in somebody who stays married, and you see this as a beautiful act of giving, whatever it is, that you have now rewritten the narrative, that what a nice guy, he's still giving her money, but he's not walking away. So he's still cheating on her because you're the woman who he's cheating on her with.
Absolutely.
It's important to ask the right questions, believe a person when they tell you. If they're not giving you good reasons why they did what they did, then you don't get involved with them. One deal breaker makes all the good stuff go away. And that's where I think you get tripped up.
Because I'm a natural optimist. I'm also a risk taker. Whilst intellectually I believe you can't change somebody, I think I do have some belief that you can transform people. And I think especially as we get to this age, we're fairly set in our ways. I know there is plasticity in the brain, but I think it's a harder and harder thing to do.
Some people do change, but they're not changed by you. They're changed because they want to change, because they realize that they are making mistakes and hurting people, and they go to therapy. They don't go to Karen therapy. They go to therapy.
Yeah, no, he never wanted to do any therapy.
That's the thing. You need to interrupt that pattern of, well, he might change. No, he will only change if he's already in process, admits that he has a problem, doesn't make excuses, and is clearly available for a relationship if that's what you're looking for. What will you need to do while you're dating online in order to know if a person is available?
If you're talking to people online, you can ask questions, but if they lie or they catfish, there's not a lot you can do about it other than be aware. I always Google people actually because I just find it interesting to Google people.
I'm not a big fan of Googling people for one of the reasons is if you already have suspicions, you probably shouldn't date them. If you have a good feeling about how somebody's speaking with you on a phone call where you're vetting somebody before you even meet them, which I recommend, then you want to meet them. You don't want to find out what the internet has to say about them because the internet isn't always right. The internet can also have falsified information. And my strong feeling is like, if you really have suspicions, then don't meet them. You know, if they're already inconsistent, if they're telling you one thing and then they can't even follow through with their lie, then it's pretty obvious up front. Or if they take forever to get back to you, all of those signs, not to make excuses because he's really good looking, you know, and he seems to have a great job and really interesting person. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go back online. It doesn't really matter what dating site or app you're on. And I want you to look for at least one or two of your must-haves. Look to see if they say separated because you've already been burnt by a separated man. I mean, there are people who are separated who are fully available, but it's not that common. So I would look for what are they looking for, right? So make sure those things are all in alignment with what you're looking for. And then when you talk to them after a few exchanges, if you feel that they're asking you questions and they're engaged and they really seem to be interested in you, not just what you look like, then you get on a call and you use a number that can't be traced. If you can get a number like that in the United States, we have Google Voice. I don't know if you have that in France. No,
I don't think so. I'm not aware of it.
See if you can get a number that's not traceable because that keeps you safer. And if not, you can always block somebody. It's not terrible.
What's really bad now is Facebook, because I've had a couple of occasions recently where I've not even spoken to somebody on a dating app, and then they turn up in my Facebook, which I find quite unnerving, actually.
So do you share the same photos on Facebook as you do on the apps?
I don't know. I need to have a look
I
at
would
it.
check that because people can do an image search and then they can find you.
Yeah, I think it was Facebook doing it.
I don't think Facebook does that on its own. I think people find a connection and they want to look you up, so they look you up on Facebook. If your Facebook profile also is public and not private, so you can limit the amount of information that people can see, I would go in and make sure to check your privacy settings. As long as you're staying safe, both on Facebook, on any social media, don't share photos because people can do a search and find you. And you take charge here. You know, I think you've let men take charge too much, where they called the shots in terms of showing you who they were, and then you staying. So they're really in charge there. Like if you see something, you say something, you ask questions, and then you follow your instinct and say, this doesn't work for me. I'm looking for a man who tells the truth. I'm looking for a man who's fully available for a relationship. And that's not you. That's okay. I'm just going to move on. And you keep moving on until you find somebody who's not a liar, who doesn't have these red flags. And you can develop a more exciting, adventurous relationship with more risk, emotional risk, or, you know, just having adventurous risks, but not to the point where you're jumping off of a high wire without a net, which is what you've done before. That's your homework. You're going to get a lot more curious when you're online. You're going to ask questions. You're going to have that vetting phone call. You're going to walk away from anyone who has any sign of any red flag. After you ask questions, if it's a questionable red flag, you'll ask questions. You'll find out. And if it's not a match, you just keep moving until you find someone. But the only way to build trust again is to know who you are, know what you want, know what you need, and then take a stand for it.
It's also quite difficult here, I think, to find somebody because of the cultural differences and the language differences.
What I would do is if you're looking for adventure and you're willing to travel, then open up your preferences. Date people in English-speaking countries who might
I
have.
see that's somebody said that to me actually. Start looking at potential export.
Yeah, I mean, and go outside of online dating to get-togethers for expats and
Yeah, no,
for
I do.
people.
I'm a member of
Yeah.
a business club, and I do go out quite a bit. But I don't know. It's always the common conundrum, isn't it? Where do men go? Because you meet a lot of women. I meet amazing women, and there must be the same amount of men around. I don't know where they are.
Well, definitely any kind of sports, any kind of gym, go eat a meal when men are getting out of work and eat at the bar and talk to people. Also, your girlfriends or people that you're meeting can have male friends. And I mean, there's so many ways to make the connection. It's really about knowing, again, who you are, what you want, what you will and won't tolerate, and then meeting people everywhere and making more romantic connections with men instead of just friendly connections, like taking those connections and take them to a date. And there's a whole art and science to that we can't go into today. I'm going to stop here because I've given you some homework and I want to know what your takeaway is from today.
I think honestly, the biggest takeaway is when you asked me which of my parents was most represented. That I'm going to think about and reflect on in some detail because I thought it was very interesting and very insightful. And I think the other thing is I was always, I think, somebody who was quite open to having sex quite early on. I was like, well, what's the issue? It's not a moral issue, blah, blah, blah. We're going. And now I think it's just become incredibly clear to me. It's nothing to do with the morals or the health or anything like that. It's actually being able to think clearly about another human being before, like you say, it gets fuzzy. And I think that's the other big takeout for me. Setting that boundary, I think, is quite key.
And you'll be able to assess somebody's true interest in you if you put off sex for a bit until you trust them more. It's like, I think a good way to look at it is, would you share your bank account information with somebody you barely know?
Yeah.
Never, right? It's not even a question.
Absolutely not.
Right, but you share your body, you share your heart, your soul with somebody who hasn't yet earned the right to it. And so I'm not saying that early sex is always a bad thing. It's not. But you have to have a lot of conversations before you have it. You have to know yourself and you have to know the questions to ask so that you can vet somebody. You're hiring them to be part of your life. You're like the CEO of your love life, right? So you get to hire and fire. You sit in that CEO seat and you decide, do I want to connect with this person? And is this person safe for me emotionally, physically, spiritually, sexually? And if they're not, then they either have to earn that safety or you walk away and find somebody who shows you from the start that they're consistent, that they are interested, that you don't have to chase them. They're not lying. They're not inconsistent in the words that they say, the actions they take. And that's how you find your last first date.
Great advice. I'll let you know how I get on.
Yeah, please let me know. And thank you so much for being willing to be coached here and share your story, share your experience, and hopefully other people will listen and find themselves in a similar position and get some support by listening to how we coach today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And thanks everybody for listening. If you love our show, please give us a high rating on Apple Podcasts. Listen to it wherever you get podcasts. We're everywhere. And share it with your friends. Follow the show. It means a lot to us. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.